22 minutes past 8 on a Wednesday in November. The main entrance of Calder House on Burrard Street, Vancouver. The kind of morning where the mountains disappear into cloud and the harbor sits gray and flat, and the city moves fast because the cold gives it no reason to slow down. Margot Ellison stepped out of the rideshare in a wool coat the color of deep water and heels that clicked twice on the wet pavement before she reached the awning. Behind her came 3 people from the Provincial Heritage Committee and a woman from the city planning office with a leather portfolio under her arm. Margot looked toward the entrance and saw the man near the revolving door, canvas jacket, paint-stained work pants, a rolled drawing tucked under one arm like a baguette. She looked at the drawing and the rubber-soled boots and the ink mark on his left hand, and spoke without turning her head. Contractors come through the side. She pointed to the narrow passage beside the building. The man looked at her once and walked the way she had pointed. The woman from the city planning office shifted her portfolio and said nothing. 3 hours earlier, on the other side of Burrard Inlet, the kitchen of a narrow house in Deed Cove smelled like burnt toast and instant oatmeal. Daniel Hurst stood at the counter in a gray thermal and old jeans with the canvas jacket hanging from the back of a chair. He was scraping the dark edge off a piece of toast with a butter knife, holding it over the sink, while his daughter Maeve sat at the kitchen table in her school uniform pulling the crust off her own toast with surgical precision. She was 9 years old and she approached most problems the way she approached math homework, methodically, with a small frown and a complete refusal to accept ambiguity. "Dad," she said without looking up, "if a building is really old, does that mean it's stronger or weaker?" Daniel looked over his shoulder. "Depends what it's made of, and how well someone took care of it. What if no one took care of it for a long time? Then you look at the bones first, see what's still holding." She considered this. She rearranged her toast crusts into a rough square on her plate, which he recognized as her thinking posture. He set 2 cups of tea on the table and sat across from her. On the wall behind her hung a photograph in a plain wooden frame. Daniel, at 31 or 32, leaner in the face, a woman beside him with her hand on his arm and her head turned slightly as if she'd heard something just out of frame, and a 4-year-old Maeve between them squinting into the sun in front of a low stone building with scaffolding on one side. The Calder House Restoration, Phase 1, 2018. The week they'd gotten the commission, Claire had been the one to open the envelope. She had read the letter out loud at the same kitchen table, and then looked up at him and said, quietly, like it was already obvious, "I told you they'd pick you." 3 years and 4 months without her now. Maeve had started counting in her own way. She marked off significant buildings whenever she passed them, the ones her dad had worked on, as if she was building a map she could follow back. "Okay," Maeve said finally, "the bones first. Always." At 7:40, he drove her to school along the water. The inlet was silver and still. Maeve talked about a field trip the following week. "We're going to an old building downtown, the one with the glass roof and the big stairs." Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "That should be interesting." "Do you know it, Dad?" A pause that lasted almost a full breath. "I know the building." He pulled up at the school, fixed her collar, reminded her that her raincoat was in her bag this time, not left at home. She hugged him the way she always did, hard and brief, like punctuation, and ran inside. At 8:15, he unlocked the door of Hearst Drafting and Design on Lonsdale Avenue in North Vancouver. The office was small, 2 drafting tables, a wide-format printer against the back wall, a shelf of binders coated by project year. It smelled of paper and the particular sharpness of drafting pens left uncapped. His assistant Theo was already in, standing at the printer with a set of rolled drawings. "Morning. The Calder House drawings are done. Heritage Committee called. They need the updated elevation set on site for the walkthrough at 9. The committee chair's assistant said walk them straight to the 2nd floor. Don't go through building management." Daniel went still. He had not been inside Calder House since 2020. "I'll take them. You stay on the Granville project." Theo slid the drawings across the table without asking why. Daniel rolled them into their tube, pulled on his jacket, and drove across the bridge. At the same hour, on the 3rd floor of Calder House, Margot Ellison stood at the long window of her temporary office and looked out at the fog sitting on the water. She had been appointed regional director of Ellison Heritage Partners 4 months ago, a fact her father had made sure the announcement mentioned 3 separate times, as if repetition would silence whoever was doing the arithmetic on her age. She was 38. Her assistant, a calm young man named Rowan, appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Ellison, the Heritage Committee confirmed arrival for 9. And there's a note from the site coordinator. She asked that all contractor deliveries come through the side access. The committee chair doesn't want the main entrance cluttered before the walkthrough." Margot turned from the window. "Who authorized direct access to the second floor for drawings?" "Your deputy, Mr. Fenn." She let it go. She had bigger things to hold. Gregory Fenn appeared behind Rowan, which was his habit, arriving in other people's frames rather than his own. 54. Silver cufflinks, the kind of smile that worked best in photographs. Margot. 3 things. Heritage Committee's on schedule. The city planning rep is bringing someone from the mayor's office, and your 9 o'clock walkthrough will start in the main hall. I've arranged for the original drawings to be displayed on the second floor as part of the presentation. She nodded. "Which firm drafted those?" "Small independent. North Van Shop. Does good technical work." He looked at his phone. "They're sending someone over with the prints." She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She did not ask the firm's name. She had no reason to. She had been given a piece of advice her first week by the building's longtime property manager, a woman named Iris Chow, who had managed the Calder House site through 2 ownership transitions and a partial fire and still came in at 7:15 every morning. Iris had said it over coffee, looking out at the scaffolding on the north facade. The entrance matters more than anything. People decide what a place is the moment they come through the door. You get one chance at that. Margot had written it in her notebook and underlined it. She had held that line every day since. At 8:55, she rode the elevator down to the main floor. The Heritage Committee's cars were already turning off Burrard. She walked through the revolving door into the wet November morning and lifted her chin to meet them. 2 floors above her, Gregory Fenn stood at his office window with his coffee. He watched the committee step out of their cars and Margot move forward to greet them with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed this moment, which he knew she had because he had seen her notes. Then his eye caught the man coming up the pavement from the direction of the side passage. Canvas jacket, drawing tube under one arm, walking without hurry toward the building's side entrance. Fenn set his coffee down. He did not look away. 8:58. Contractors come through the side. Daniel looked at the woman once and walked the way she had pointed. He did not look back. He had designed the side access himself, specified the door width, the threshold detail, the overhead clearance. Back in 2017, when the Phase 1 drawings were still on his drafting table and Claire used to bring tea into the office at 11 and stay to look at the plans spread across the table, asking questions that always turned out to be better questions than he'd thought of. He walked along the stone facade of the building and did not change his expression. At the side entrance, Iris Chow was at her desk near the door with a site log and a cup of green tea going cold beside it. She had been managing this building for 19 years. She had been the one who walked the original design team through the space in 2017, pointing out the structural concerns with the north wall, the water damage behind the east plaster, the original cast iron columns they'd found under a century of drywall. She looked up when the door opened. She saw him. Her tea tilted. "Mr. Hurst." Her radio crackled. Gregory Fenn's voice too smooth. "Iris, the delivery from the print shop. Take the drawings and let them out. Committee's about to start." Iris's expression did not change on the outside. On the inside, 19 years of Calder House compressed into a single moment. She stood up. "Mr. Hurst, I didn't know you were coming personally. I'm so sorry you were sent around." "It's all right, Iris. Good to see you." She logged him in herself. She handed him a visitor tag and held the elevator. He rode up with 2 tradespeople in hard hats who were discussing a plumbing detail on the 4th floor and did not notice him at all. On the 2nd floor, he handed the drawing tube to a young man in the committee lanyard who thanked him without looking at his face. He took the elevator back down. He walked toward the side exit. 1 floor below, Margot was leading the Heritage Committee through the main hall. Gregory Finn was at her right shoulder. The city planning rep was making notes. The woman from the mayor's office was looking up at the ceiling coffers. Daniel had spent 11 days on those specifications, sitting at the drafting table after Maeve was asleep, getting the proportions right, because the original drawings for 1909 were incomplete, and he had to reason backward from the photographs. The main staircase elevator chimed. The doors opened. A man stepped out who was not a committee member and not staff, 71 years old. Dark wool overcoat, white hair, the unhurried bearing of someone who had been important long enough to stop performing it. Arthur Calder, the building's principal donor and the reason the restoration had been funded at all. He had not appeared at a site walkthrough in 2 years. The committee chair's head turned. The city planning rep straightened. Fenn's chin lifted in a way that looked like welcome but was closer to calculation. Margot moved forward. "Mr. Calder, we're honored." He raised one hand, not unkindly. He walked past her. He walked past the committee entirely. He walked across the stone floor of the main hall toward the side corridor, and Daniel Hurst came out of it at the same moment with his visitor tag still clipped to his jacket. Arthur Calder stopped in front of him and put his hand out. "Daniel, I owe you an apology for the entrance. That should not have happened." The hall went quiet. Somewhere above them, a carpenter's tool went still. The woman from the mayor's office lowered her pen. Daniel took the older man's hand. He did not smile. He nodded once. Arthur Calder turned. He drew Daniel forward by the elbow with a steadiness that allowed no interruption. His voice, clear and unhurried. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce Daniel Hurst, lead restoration architect on the Calder House Commission from 2017 through 2020, recipient of the Canadian Institute of Architects Heritage Award, and the reason the north wall of this building is still standing. His name is on the foundation stone you passed on your way in." The committee chair was the first to step forward. She offered her hand. The city planning rep followed. The woman from the mayor's office introduced herself with more attention in her eyes than she had given anyone else all morning. Gregory Finn stood where he was. His expression did not change on the outside. On the inside, he was doing a very fast and very unpleasant calculation. Margot stood in the center of the hall. She could feel the cold of the stone floor through the soles of her shoes. The blood had left her face in a single quiet wave. She did not move toward Daniel. She did not move away. She stood still the way a person stands when they are deciding what kind of person they are going to be next. Arthur Calder invited the committee upstairs for the presentation. He included Daniel with a small nod. Daniel thanked him and declined. "I have to pick up my daughter at 3. You'll come back another time." "I will." He walked out through the main entrance. For the first time, Margot did not watch him go. She turned professionally and gestured the committee toward the staircase. She made the introduction she had prepared. She answered every question with the precision she had practiced. She did not let her voice change. It was Iris Chow, passing through the hall on her way back to her desk, who caught her eye for 1/2 second. No expression, no judgment, just a look that was somehow the most legible thing in the room. At 12:30, Margot returned to her office and closed the door. She sat at her desk without turning on the overhead light. After a while, she opened her laptop and typed the name Daniel Hurst into the Provincial Heritage Registry database. 14 results. Hurst Drafting and Design. Founding Principal. Lead Architect. Calder House Restoration Phase 1, 2017-2020. Canadian Institute of Architects Heritage Award, 2019. A photograph of a man at a site walkthrough in a hard hat, younger in the face. A woman just visible at the left edge of the frame in a yellow rain jacket, turned away from the camera. The obituary came up at the bottom of the search. Claire Ann Hurst, survived by her husband Daniel and her daughter Maeve. July 2021. The design firm had restructured 3 months after that. Reduced staff. Moved to a smaller office. Margot sat very still for a long time. At 2 o'clock, she drove herself across the bridge to North Vancouver. She found Hurst Drafting and Design on Lonsdale. The door was unlocked, but the front desk was empty. A young man in the back looked up and told her Daniel had gone to pick up his daughter. She stood on the pavement in her coat in the gray November afternoon and felt something she did not have a precise word for. Not guilt exactly. Because guilt had always seemed too small for the specific way you could fail someone without meaning to. Something closer to recognition. She took a business card from her wallet. She crossed out her title with 2 clean strokes of pen and wrote underneath, "I owe you a conversation that isn't through an assistant or a committee. M. Ellison." She slid it under the door. That evening at 6:40, Gregory Finn sat in his car in the Calder House Parkade and called a board member named Warren Shue. "Warren, you saw what happened this morning?" She redirected the architect who designed the building through the side entrance. "There's a photo of it. Someone from the committee caught it. I'm not making a complaint. I'm just making sure the right people have the context." Warren said something that required him to listen carefully. When it was done, Fenn smiled at the steering wheel. "Appreciate it. Just wanted you to have the picture." At the same hour, Daniel unlocked his front door and let Maeve go ahead of him down the hall. She dropped her school bag at the foot of the stairs with the practiced indifference of a child who has learned that backpacks are other people's problem. "Dad, did you go in the building today? The one with the big stairs?" He set his keys on the counter. "I did, just for a few minutes." "What's it like inside now?" He thought about the stone hull, the ceiling coffers. The old man's hand extended across the lobby floor like a small and deliberate act of repair. "It's coming along," he said. "I think you'll like it when it's finished." The weeks that followed were precise and awkward in the way that working alongside someone you've misjudged tends to be. Arthur Calder had offered Daniel a consulting role on Phase 2, part-time, no drawing signed, just eyes on the work. And Daniel had agreed on one condition, 3 o'clock pickup, every day, non-negotiable. It was written into the contract. Margot administered from the Ellison heritage side. Daniel worked 4 mornings a week out of a small desk on the 3rd floor. They did not discuss what had happened in the lobby. They discussed floor plans, structural reports, window restoration schedules. She noticed the way he moved through the building, not like a visitor and not quite like staff, but like someone rereading a letter they wrote a long time ago, checking to see if they still meant it. She brought him the contractor's proposed changes to the east staircase one Tuesday morning. He looked at them for about 40 seconds, then picked up a pencil and made 3 marks. "This landing width will feel wrong at 4 in the afternoon," he said. "The light comes in from the north there. By the time people are leaving for the day, it'll be dim and the narrow measurement will read as crept. Needs another 30 centimeters. She had measured it herself and hadn't seen it. She wrote down 30 centimeters. One Thursday evening, they worked late through a problem with the 2nd floor heritage window specifications. At 8:30, she ordered Thai food to the small site office and put the containers on the table between the drawings. The building had gone quiet 2 hours before. Only the overnight security guard moved at the far end of the corridor. She asked quietly, after a while, about Claire. He set his chopsticks down. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "She was sick for 8 months. I kept thinking I could finish the Phase 2 drawings before it got worse and then be home more. I told myself December. Then I said February. She died in July, and I had been there, but not enough. Not the way I meant to be. I'm sorry. It's not a raw grief anymore. It's just the shape of things now." She did not press further. She looked at her food and thought about what to say, and then decided to say the true thing instead of the careful one. "My mother managed a hotel in Halifax for 22 years. There was a guest once who handed her back a room service tray and told her the coffee was cold and that she should be more careful. He said it the way people say things when they've decided your furniture. I was 15. I was in the lobby waiting for her shift to end. I watched her smile at him and say she was sorry and take the tray back." Margot looked at the window. The lights of North Vancouver floated on the dark water below. "I swore I would never be that man. I would never look at someone and see furniture." She turned back to the table. "On Wednesday morning, I was exactly him." Daniel looked at her across the takeout containers. After a moment, "We spend so much energy running from the version of ourselves we're afraid of. Sometimes we run so hard we don't notice we've arrived there." She didn't answer. She picked up her chopsticks and looked at the floor plan in front of her. Down the hall, Gregory Fenn was walking toward the site office with a USB drive and a reasonable cover story. He paused at the narrow window beside the door. He looked in. He lifted his phone. He held it at the glass for 3 seconds and then lowered it and walked on. Iris Chow, coming out of the records room across the hall with a stack of archived prints, saw him at the window. She saw the phone go up and come down. She stood in the corridor with the prints in her arms and said nothing. She walked back to the records room. She put the prints on the shelf. She sat down at the small desk and opened a notebook and began writing, in her careful administrative handwriting, a sequence of dates and times. She had managed this building for 19 years. She had 14 months left before she planned to retire. She was going to finish correctly. The formal review was called for the following Wednesday at 9 in the morning in the main boardroom on the 4th floor. Gregory Fenn had submitted a conduct concern to the Parrot Board in Toronto, 2 photographs taken through a glass door, captioned as inappropriate professional proximity between the regional director and the project's heritage consultant, accompanied by a memorandum detailing the lobby incident as evidence of failed leadership judgment and possible personal entanglement, compromising the project's neutrality. Margot read it at 5:50 in the morning at her kitchen counter with both hands around a cup of coffee she wasn't tasting. She read it twice. She put it down. She showered and put on the charcoal suit she wore when she was preparing for difficulty and drove to the building in the dark. Daniel received an email from Arthur Calder at 7:45 summoning him to the same room at the same hour. No explanation. He drove across the bridge with his hands easy on the wheel, the way a man drives when he has already decided that whatever is waiting for him is not the worst thing that's ever waited. They arrived in the 4th floor corridor at 8:55. Margot looked at him for 1 second and looked away. He held the door. Inside, the long table was already full. Warren Shue sat at one end with the particular stillness of a man who has already made his decision. Fenn sat at the other in a new suit with the smallest possible smile arranged on his face. The chair read the charges in a level voice. Public conduct unbecoming a regional director. Suggestion of personal entanglement, compromising operational neutrality. Margot raised her hand. She accepted full responsibility for her conduct at the entrance on Wednesday morning. She rejected the second charge on the record. There was a knock at the boardroom door. Iris Chow opened it without waiting. She walked in wearing her sight jacket with a slim folder under her arm, and the expression of a woman who had been deciding to do this for several weeks and had finally run out of reasons not to. She did not look at Fenn. My apologies for the interruption. There are several matters the board should have before this proceeds. She laid the folder on the table. On Wednesday morning, the 6th of November, Mr. Fenn instructed me by radio to direct the visiting architect through the side access, knowing that the visiting architect was the lead designer of the Phase 1 restoration. I have the radio log. On Thursday evening, the 14th, Mr. Fenn photographed Ms. Ellison and Mr. Hurst through the site office window without their knowledge. I witnessed it from across the corridor. On Friday the 15th, Mr. Fenn emailed a freelance journalist named Caleb Park offering exclusive information on a developing situation at this company. The forwarded message is in the folder. On Saturday the 16th and Sunday the 17th, Mr. Fenn placed calls to Mr. Jew's personal number totaling 41 minutes. She paused. I have not said anything until now because Mr. Fenn is the officer who countersigns my retirement settlement and I have 14 months remaining. I have managed Calder House for 19 years. I am not going to let it be used to remove another person who built something good. Fenn stood up. This is a facilities manager making accusations above her station. Nothing she said is. The door at the back of the room opened. Arthur Calder walked in. He did not hurry. He walked to the head of the table and stood behind the chair and looked down the length of it at Fenn with the unhurried patience of a man who has outlasted many rooms. Sit down, Gregory. Fenn sat. Arthur turned to the board. My office has been reviewing Mr. Fenn's communications and his escalation patterns for 11 months. Miss Chow's documentation corroborates everything we already have. Mr. Para, Fan is suspended without pay effective today, pending referral to legal counsel for tortious interference and breach of fiduciary duty. He turned to Margot. Miss Ellison, I appointed you because I believed you understood what this building is for. Wednesday morning suggested otherwise. The last 3 weeks suggest you've remembered. Margot held his gaze. I won't forget again. See that you don't. He looked at Daniel. The corner of his mouth moved barely. My apologies, Daniel. Again. Accepted, Arthur. Again. The board adjourned. Gregory Fenn was escorted to the main elevator and down to the lobby by building security, in full view of the morning staff arriving for their shifts. Iris Chow watched from her desk with no expression on her face and wrote the time in her log. That evening, Margot left the building at 7. She walked through the main entrance at the pace of someone who was no longer pretending to be in a hurry. She looked at the restored plasterwork on the ceiling. She looked at the proportions of the columns. She looked at the way the evening light came through the restored transom windows above the door and understood, for the first time, that Daniel had specified the glass to catch exactly this hour. Iris Chow was still at her desk. Margot stopped in front of her. She had not planned what to say. Thank you, Iris. Iris looked up. She did not smile. She inclined her head, the way she had inclined it 19 years ago to a young architect on his first walkthrough of a building that needed someone to believe in it. Then she went back to her log. Daniel was outside on the pavement. He had not planned to be there at the same moment. He was simply standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking up Burrard Street at nothing in particular, the way a person stands when the day has been too full to process indoors. Can I drive you to the ferry? He looked at her. He nodded. She drove him along the water with the heat on and the radio off. The lights of the North Shore reflected in long broken lines on the inlet. The night air outside was cold and smelled of the sea. Neither of them spoke for a long stretch of the drive. Maeve asked me something last night, Daniel said. What did she ask? She asked if you were the lady who sent the card under the door. Margot kept her eyes on the road. What did you tell her? I told her I thought so. I don't explain everything to her all at once. She's 9. She figures things out in her own time, and she's usually right. Margot nodded slowly. She thought of the business card, the crossed-out title, the words she had written standing on the pavement in the November cold, feeling like a person who had just located the source of a drip they'd been hearing for weeks and found it was themselves. She pulled up at the ferry terminal. The queue of cars was already moving. She stopped at the drop-off lane and left the engine running. Before he opened the door, he turned to her. You know why I didn't argue with you at the entrance on Wednesday? Why? Because I designed that door. I knew where every entrance went and what it was for, and I knew that if I walked through the side door without making a sound, the building would do the rest. He looked at the windshield. I stopped expecting situations to defend me a long time ago. Wednesday happened the way it did because someone else decided to pay attention. That's not something I could have arranged. She looked at him properly for the first time all evening. The green glow of the dashboard caught the line of his jaw and the ink stain she now recognized as permanent. Always on the left hand, always from the same drafting pen. And if it hadn't worked out that way, he thought about it the way he thought about structural problems, not fast, but thoroughly. I would have driven home, made dinner. Maeve would have asked me about the building, and I would have told her it was coming along, and that would have been fine. He looked at her. I don't need buildings to vindicate me. I just need to keep building. He got out and closed the door quietly. She watched him walk to the terminal. He turned once, not to wave, just to check the direction, and then he was through the door and gone. She sat in the drop-off lane with her hands on the wheel long enough that the car behind her eventually moved around. She pulled out and drove back along the water and did not turn the radio on all the way home. 5 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in early January, the Calder House Phase 1 restoration was formally marked with a small public ceremony. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of Vancouver winter day when the mountains reappear out of the clouds sharp and white and the water in the inlet is a dark, clean blue. The restored main hall had been opened to the public for the first time. The original cast-iron columns ran the full length of the space, repainted in their period black and left exposed. The plasterwork on the ceiling had been reconstructed from archive photographs. The transom windows above the main entrance threw long parallelograms of winter light across the stone floor. Daniel had spent 6 weeks on the Phase 2 consulting. He had not signed any drawings. He had marked them in soft pencil and handed them back to the staff architect, whose name would go on the title block. Margot stood at the entrance at 9:45 in a long coat the color of slate. She had asked Daniel and Maeve to come as her guests. Arthur Calder was already inside, speaking quietly with the Heritage Committee chair. A small crowd of donors and community members moved through the restored foyer. The white Subaru wagon pulled up at 10 to 10. Maeve got out first in a plaid dress and rain boots, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. She covered the distance between the car and the entrance at the focused trot of a child who has identified a destination. She stopped in front of Margot and looked up at her with the appraising directness that Daniel had apparently given her, along with his cheekbones and his habit of noticing structural details. Hi, Maeve. Is this the building you and Dad fixed? Your dad did most of the fixing. I kept it from being sold for parts. Maeve considered this with her head tilted. That's important, though. I'm starting to think so. Daniel came up behind her. Clean dark jacket, new collar. He had shaved that morning. He looked at the stone facade the way he had looked at it in the photographs from 2017, but differently now, with the additional layer that comes from having left something and returned to find it still standing. He looked at Margot. She held out her hand. He looked at it for one beat, not reluctance, not calculation, just a man accounting for the full weight of a moment. And then he took it. Maeve took his other hand without being asked, because she was 9 and she had already assessed the situation and reached her own conclusions. The three of them walked through the main entrance of Calder House together. Arthur Calder spoke briefly inside. He stood under the restored skylight with the donors arrayed in a loose half-circle and acknowledged everyone who had made the project possible. When he said Daniel's name, he said it simply and let the room do the rest. The room applauded. Margot spoke last. She had one index card of notes, and she looked at it once. I have learned in the last 2 months that the way we receive someone at the door determines the way we run everything behind it. This building was restored to be open to people. I would like to operate the same way. She did not look at Daniel. The room applauded with the particular warmth of people who have understood more than was said. Afterward, there were refreshments on a long table by the east windows where the winter light was best. Maeve took one of everything and assessed each item with the methodical seriousness she brought to most decisions. Daniel moved slowly through the restored hall with his hands in his jacket pockets, stopping at the columns he had specified, reading the plasterwork the way a person rereads their own handwriting after a long time away, checking to see if they'd meant it. He stopped at the north wall, the one the committee had wanted to demolish in 2018, the one he had argued to keep, the one that had required the most work, and turned out to have the original brick behind the later facing, undamaged. He put his palm flat on the plaster for a moment and then moved on. Maeve found him near the transom windows and stood beside him looking at the light on the floor. Dad, you said the bones first. That's right. This building has good bones. It does. She tugged his sleeve. Can we ask Miss Margot to come for lunch after? There's that place with the soup. He looked across the hall to where Margot was talking to the Heritage Committee chair. She looked up at the same moment, across the distance of the restored hall, and he gave the smallest nod. She said something brief to the committee chair and came over. The soup restaurant on Water Street smelled like cardamom and bread and the particular warmth of a room that has been keeping people comfortable for a long time. They took the corner table, the round one near the window that looked out on the street. Maeve opened her sketchbook immediately and propped it against the edge of the table. Daniel and Margot ordered soup and talked about Phase 2. The window restoration on the west elevation. The schedule for the remaining plasterwork. The question of the fourth-floor corridor lighting. The conversation was practical. They were both aware that they were being practical on purpose, and that it was a form of courtesy, a way of being in the same room without asking more of it than it was ready for. The bowls came. Maeve drew. Outside the window, Water Street moved through its Saturday with the unhurried pace of a city that has decided, at least for this morning, not to be in a hurry. "Maeve," Margot said, "what are you drawing?" She held up one finger. She finished the line. She turned the sketchbook around and slid it across the table to her father. Then she tilted it so Margot could see. 3 people standing in front of a long building with tall windows. A man in a jacket. A small girl in rain boots. A woman in a coat holding the girl's hand. A tree. 2 birds. In the background, very small but precise, a mountain with snow on top. Margot looked at the drawing. She looked at it for long enough that the silence had a shape. Daniel looked at it. He looked at Maeve, who had already turned to the next page and was drawing a bear with a very serious expression, her tongue tucked into the corner of her mouth. He leaned slightly toward Margot, low, just for her. She only draws what she's already decided is true. Margot looked at the drawing for another moment. Then she set it carefully on the table between them, like something she was choosing to keep. Outside on Water Street, a woman walked past with a dog on a long lead. A streetcar moved in the distance. The winter light sat on the rooftops clean and level. Maeve gave her bear a scarf and then a small bird perched on its shoulder. Because she had decided the bear needed company. At the table, no one said anything for a while. That was all right. Some things take the time they take, and some buildings, and some people, are worth the waiting. I keep thinking about the side entrance. Not the moment Arthur Calder crossed the lobby floor, though that moment was everything. I keep thinking about the 20 seconds before it. Daniel walking along that stone facade with his drawing tube under his arm, hands easy, face unchanged. He had designed that door. He knew exactly where it led. And he walked through it anyway, without argument, without performance. Because he had already decided that his dignity didn't depend on which entrance he used. That's the part that stays with me. There's a version of this story where Daniel makes a scene, where he stops at the front entrance and says, quietly but clearly, "Do you know who I am?" And maybe he would have been right to, but he didn't. Because somewhere along the way, through the loss of Claire, through the years of rebuilding something smaller and more honest than what he'd had before, he had learned that integrity isn't what you defend. It's what you carry in with you, regardless of the door. Margot is a harder story to sit with, because I recognize her more. She had spent so long running from her mother's hotel lobby, from that man with the room service tray and the casual cruelty, that she had built an entire professional identity around never being the person on the wrong side of that exchange. And then one Wednesday morning, in a moment of distracted authority, she became him exactly. That's how it works. The thing we are most afraid of becoming has a way of finding the blind spot. The place where our vigilance runs out and our assumptions take over. What strikes me about both of them is that neither one collapsed when it mattered. Margot could have defended herself at the board hearing, shifted the blame, let the institution absorb it. She didn't. She stood up and took responsibility for the lobby and rejected the rest, clearly and without drama. That takes a particular kind of clear-headedness. The ability to hold 2 true things at once. I was wrong about this, and I am not wrong about that. It's rarer than it sounds. And Iris, 19 years in a building, 14 months left on her contract. She wrote down the dates anyway. She walked into that boardroom anyway. That is the kind of quiet courage that doesn't make headlines, but it is the kind that actually holds things together. She didn't act because it was safe. She acted because she had decided, somewhere in that records room, that finishing correctly mattered more than finishing comfortably. What I take from all of this is something I'm still working out. That the way we treat someone at a door, any door, a revolving glass one on Burrard Street or the front door of a conversation, tells the truth about us before we've had a chance to prepare our version of it. That real steadiness isn't the absence of being hurt. It's the ability to keep building after. That the people worth trusting are usually the ones who don't need to tell you they are. Maeve drew 3 figures in front of a building and didn't look up to see if anyone approved. Her father built the bones of a place that outlasted his grief and asked for nothing back. Some things take the time they take.